Today, we get to talk about federal civil asset forfeiture in Section 120. You probably heard of horror stories about civil asset forfeiture. Here in North Carolina in 2014, the Department of Justice seized $107,000 from Lyndon McClellan, a convenience store owner who often deposited cash. And so depositing cash was suspicious. And so they seized his money, but he was lucky. A year later, they finally dropped the case and he got the money back. People aren't always so lucky. That same year, police seized thousands of dollars from a man who had just won the lottery. That good luck, though, got canceled out because even though he showed the receipts to the police, say, look, here's the $5,000 receipt from the money I just won. They took his money anyway. And eventually, after a year, they offered to give most of it back, and he agreed rather than try and sue them to get all of it back. Civil asset forfeiture is the process where law enforcement agencies take property, often cash or cars or things that are theoretically connected with crime, but they don't actually have to charge anyone with a crime in order to keep that property. This happens, billions and billions of dollars get seized every single year, more than $2 billion by the Department of Justice in 2019. Now, there are many organizations that all agree that this is a policy that tramples on civil liberties. Institute for Justice does a lot of work on trying to push back against civil asset forfeiture. This process has kind of always been around. Back in the early days, smugglers and things might have their property seized. They would just abandon property, but it really ramped up back in the 90s as part of the war on drugs. And if people who are accused of dealing drugs or whatever, if they had money, we created a financial incentive for state and federal police departments to go after and try and take that money. And once we created that incentive, they just kept doing it. And it's gotten bad. Wesley Hottot, who's a litigator for the Institute for Justice, he recently talked about a case where a man he'd moved, and he'd had his sister mail him his savings, nearly $9,000. And according to Hottot, when he offered to help the man recover his money, because he hadn't done anything wrong, the post office had seized his money, but the guy didn't want to help. The guy said, look, I grew up as a black man in Alabama. My relationship with the government is very different than your relationship, and I don't want to get involved in this. To have to fight to maybe have a chance of getting your property back, this is a fight that many people just give up on. They just accept the fact that essentially they have been robbed and there's nothing they can be done about it. It happens all the time in courts that he who has the most economic resources usually wins. And it's usually the government in cases like this. One of like many of the laws on the books, this one is colorblind on its face, but in practice, it doesn't work out that way. A 2015 study by the ACLU of Pennsylvania, they found that 63% of Philadelphia cash forfeitures involved money taken from Black residents, who only made up 43% of the city's population. And of those seizures, more than 70% had cash forfeited without being convicted of a crime. In South Carolina, they determined that Black men were 65% of all the citizens targeted for civil forfeitures, even though Black men only make up 13% of the state's population. They also found that white people were twice as likely to get their money back. Of course, even if you do win and get your money back, you can still lose. In August of 2012, Mandrel Stewart, he was driving in Fairfax, Virginia, and the police pulled him over, and they detained Stewart and his girlfriend for 2 hours. They found 1/100th of a gram of marijuana and $17,000 in cash. Stewart explained he owned a restaurant. He was going to buy supplies for his restaurant, and the police handcuffed him, took him to police station. They didn't charge him, but they kept his money. It took him 14 months in a lawsuit to get that money back, but it was too late. He lost his restaurant, having all of his working capital confiscated by the police. We have to do better. We can do better, and we can fix it in the blueprint for a better America. There's been a couple attempts to address civil assets forfeiture over the years. In 2017, Rand Paul introduced the FAIR Act to increase the burden of proof. I'm sure that you at least got a lawyer while trying to prove you should get your property back. And instead of letting the Department of Justice keep assets, giving it to the Treasury to try and discourage that for-profit motive from civil asset forfeiture. But that didn't go anywhere. But in 2020, Justin Amash introduced HR 8997 to end the practice of civil asset forfeiture. And so that's where most of the language from Section 120 comes from, is amending Chapter 942 of the United States Code, Section 981, that currently lays out all the procedures for civil asset forfeiture, is completely repealed and replaced instead with this one sentence. No person shall be required under the laws of the United States to forfeit to the United States any property, real or personal, pursuant to a civil forfeiture proceeding, including a non-judicial civil forfeiture proceeding. That's it. We're going to end the practice of civil asset forfeiture on the federal level. We have an opportunity to set a better example, and don't take people's stuff unless they've been convicted of a crime. The next subsection, or the next section in that chapter of law, deals with criminal asset forfeiture, and that's left alone. But the rest of the chapter is repealed. Criminal asset forfeiture, okay, if somebody committed a crime, and you can take assets related to that. But outside of the criminal process, this will end the practice of civil asset forfeiture. Amash's bill left in a bunch of stuff related to the drug war. The Blueprint for a Better America, the federal drug war, will be ended, so it's no longer necessary. And that's why we end up repealing the remaining sections of Chapter 46. Civil asset forfeiture is not justice. So Section 120 is going to have the federal government lead by example. This is what the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, this is supposed to protect against, where it says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. And, the defenders of this law can say, well, we wrote a law that says it's okay, so that's due process. And to which I say, we can and should repeal that law. Next, Chair, I think that concludes my testimony for Section 120, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.